Welcome, listeners. I'm so glad you're back again with 10 Minutes with Tracy. We might go just a titch longer, Tracy, because I feel like there's so much to talk about. So what we do at the beginning of the month is we kind of go through some of the lessons that we learned in the podcast from the month before. And so just to kind of, bring up some of those past lessons, we had the lovely attorney Claire Samuels on, and she talked about a becoming divorce, which I love. Just, it's my whole thing, doing it different, making it better. And then that was followed by one from me talking about the 6 steps to collaborative communication. And I think the most important point from that lesson, I think it's the first thing on the list, is listening. So when you want to communicate, you want to listen. And Tracy, I was just mentioning this. I'm reading a book called Green Light. So good, by Matthew McConaughey. And he has a really interesting perspective when he is in another country. I think it's Africa. And he's sitting with 2 men and they're talking about some issue of the time. And one man says his point of view, and the other man has a different point of view. And then Matthew comes in and he's going to agree with one of them. And they both get angry at him because he didn't understand that they weren't arguing. They were just saying, do you understand what I say? Oh, I feel like that is something, that is a lesson for our country. It's about understanding more than it is about spewing out what you want to say. So I bring you here today to kind of coach us through how maybe we can be better listeners, or if you have any perspective on that.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. It's kismic because I spent a lot of time in the car over the last 48 hours. And I was thinking a lot about the art of understanding and how often our confusion or our lack of understanding makes us feel something and drives us to react. And if we can remind ourselves that all we need to really do is understand the other person, so we could actually enter into a conversation just with the commitment to listen so intently that we understand their point of view. I think we often fall prey to listening with like half intention. We're listening with the intention to just hear enough so that we can formulate a response to what it is that they're saying, which keeps us only half engaged, right?
Yep.
And we actually go into that conversation with a commitment to ourselves that we're just there to listen and understand. It changes the entire dynamic. It takes all of this pressure off of us thinking that we have to respond in some way when we don't. There is no need for us to respond. All we are there to do is to understand their perspective. We do not need to respond. We don't need to
Right.
react. We can just listen and understand.
And, I think that was part of my podcast and my latest newsletter, kind of talking about how I have just been practicing being aware of how just like with feelings, like becoming aware of it, becoming aware of how I listen. I am not great at it. And I am a woman learning how to listen better. And then, as I thought through it, I thought about like when I go to an event, how you forget a person's name right away, or I do, because I'm not really listening.
Right.
And then I also thought about the people that I love to be around at a party is someone who I don't even learn anything about. They're asking me and learning about me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so eye-opening. I want to be that person.
Yeah.
And then, naturally, of course, we all want to be understood, but you can set the stage for that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that just ties beautifully back to the podcast that you did on becoming divorced, right? It's like
Yes.
you're becoming the next version of yourself. So you are really you have this heightened sense of awareness around wanting to be a better listener. You're becoming the next version of Lisa Koski, who listens very intently. Your intention is to listen and to
Yes.
understand. It's not to go in there and listen just enough to formulate a response.
Right.
You're intently going into these experiences wanting to listen to understand.
I
And
love how you tied that becoming divorce episode in. And Tracy, as we're talking about this, I think again about how you work on yourself. And so many times, and then it just keeps me making me think of self-made you, self-made you. That is your story, Tracy, about, and that is what has changed my life, and I hope impacts the people that I work with. But what I find is sometimes when you work on yourself, and that's why when you come into a mediation, if you are focused on your intent and maybe write down a little bit and be intentional about listening and understanding, it's really, really amazing. And it's not always, but the majority of the time, the other person steps up to the plate and becomes better. They just follow suit.
yeah,
And
yeah. Well,
sometimes it can save a marriage by
yeah,
one person working on themselves.
yeah. That is not surprising. It requires you to give up that story, that belief that you have about that person, and really just take under consideration, what if that story is wrong? That story that I'm operating from, what if that isn't even accurate? And then if you just allow yourself to take that in for a moment, like you said, it opens up the door to so many possibilities. You have no
Tracy,
idea how this, will result if you just with intention ask yourself, what if I'm wrong about that story?
okay, so I so love that you brought up stories because I didn't even know if I'd have time to talk to you about this, but I was inspired by a TikTok this morning and someone was just on quick. I don't even know who it was. I'm kind of new to TikTok. I'm trying to get it, but it is interesting and there are little tidbits that I like. So hopefully you'll see me there soon. And you're on, which I love
I'm
because
on
you
there.
know, yes.
I'm learning.
Yes. So, okay. So this man came on and said, isn't it interesting how you have one man who says, I'm an alcoholic because, of course, I am. My dad was an alcoholic, and that's all, and so now I am. And then his brother, who was raised in the same home, can say, I don't drink anything because my dad was an alcoholic. Oh,
Yeah,
that's the story and the meaning that you put behind it.
exactly. Yeah.
Exactly what you were saying.
Yep, that's a great illustration. And I think for anybody who needs evidence to really dive into this practice, and the practice is so simple, you guys. Don't let the word practice scare you. It is truly just heightening your awareness, like what Lisa is doing around listening.
Mhm.
I'm asking you to maybe practice a thought about, what if I'm wrong? Or what if that isn't correct? Like the man who thinks he's an alcoholic because his dad is an alcoholic, but what if that isn't true?
Right.
You know, I mean, there are times when I say that to myself that my breath catches, because I realize how I have so tightly held on to a story that has become part of my identity. And when I question that thought
Yes.
that has become a belief, it's like, what? What do you mean? What if that
Yes.
isn't true? But it opens up the door. And this can be applied to all of your relationships, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with
Yes.
your employer, your relationship with your body, right? The relationship with times of your life, chapters of your life. Just consider that for a moment. What if that story that I'm so tightly identified by, I'm so tightly tied to, what if that isn't accurate?
Tracy, that's so head on, and it's so interesting because as I do this work, I have some stories that I'm doing that with, or even like, is that nice to me? Is it serving me?
Mhm.
And then how interesting it is that I've got my husband of 30 years who is buying into that story, and he is telling my story too. And now is my opportunity to be strong and change that story.
Yeah.
And it's just so, I just got chills. It's just so interesting to me to watch that evolution.
Mhm. Yeah.
And and I think just for our listeners, and here we are, 10 minutes, they're up. And I didn't even really talk to you about a saddle up segment, but can you, let's go into our saddle up segment, Tracy. Can you give some advice to our listeners, something that they can do right now to maybe change a story that isn't serving them well?
Mhm. Yeah. So just go back to the illustration, the picture that you so beautifully like um, told us that your husband is now sharing that story. It's a story that you curated. He's heard you say it so many times, or he's maybe watched you live it. You've modeled it for him, and now he's picked it up and started to run with that story. And you've recognized that's actually not the story that I want to be identified by. And I would just put words to that so that you can like breathe this in and really like settle into the fact that you are becoming a person who writes your own story. Like it's so good. And so it's no different than, you are becoming a new way of being married or a new way of being divorced. It's the next version of you, and breathe that in and really like start to live into I'm becoming the next version of myself. And notice I'm not even saying the next best version. You're just becoming the next version of yourself. So I would, as a saddle up segment, I would challenge your listeners to define what it is that you are becoming.
I love that. That's so, so good. And I can't help but, just add in this doing divorced different. And I know that I can say I do divorce different because you don't fight it out in court. I work together with you, but it's so much more. I care so deeply for my clients, and I honestly want them to do what Tracy Plushcourt just mentioned in the saddle up segment, to become a different version of themselves. It can be positive and inspiring.
And so exciting. It's so exciting.
Yes, I love it. Tracy, dear, we have passed the 10 minutes, but I'm so thankful for you and for you giving your coaching free to my listeners. It's so helpful. Thank you so much for being here. And listeners, check her out at Self Made You. It'll be in the show notes. She's awesome. I use Tracy every week. We have our coaching calls, and you can too. She is amazing. So thanks for being here, Tracy.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Take care.